evening. First and foremost, please allow me to thank President Joko Widodo for organizing this G20 summit and for gathering all of us here in Bali. Please allow me also to thank all of the people of Bali, because I'm well aware of the consequences, the constraints of such a meeting. And please, I also would like to commend the major role played by Indonesia this year for peace and multilateralism. We all knew it would be a difficult G20, and we knew as well that the political context of the war in Ukraine would impact our discussions. And the developments, the news of last night, very much underlined how complex the situation is. And in this respect, a few hours ago and just a few minutes ago, once again, I talked to the Polish authorities, and I presented my condolences for the victim made by the rocket that fell on the Polish territory. And we will stand by Poland and make sure that all the necessary light is shed on these events. We're currently cooperating with Poland to find out exactly what happened, and we're doing it with all of the allies with whom we met this morning. I also called the President Zelensky, who took the floor twice on the occasion of the G20, and I expressed France's solidarity further to the many missile strikes on Ukraine yesterday. Between 80 to 100 Russian missiles were sent on the Ukrainian territory yesterday. It was a very difficult day, and all of that being orchestrated by Russia. But like I said, the choice that we made, and in coherence with our beliefs over the past few months, is we did our utmost to prevent any division of the G20. It is not, of course, for the G20 to put an end to the war or to decide about peace, but at least for this summit, we managed to send a very clear message to prevent any escalation, to prevent a partition of the world. And I believe that in this respect, notwithstanding the various sensitivities, there was a clear message sent by the international community, in particular sent to Russia. This is the reason why the first important conclusion of this summit is that the G20 certainly did not turn a blind eye to the war, and our discussions showed that there was room for convergence, including with the main emerging countries, including China and India, to push Russia to de-escalate. And this is very much in coherence with what France defended in New York in September at the UN. Even though Putin did not come, the message sent across by the major economic powers in Bali is very clear. The vast majority of the members of the G20 explicitly condemn the war in Ukraine. This is a fact. We could see it at the United Nations on the occasion of the latest resolution, but the G20 is also taking note. The resolution, the UN resolution, just like the communique also expresses a large G20 consensus, including with China and India. It shows that in the context of the growing number of global crises and challenges, the G20 does not want war. And the G20 is also saying that even though it is a club of economic cooperation, all of the members very much affirm that this club is rooted in compliance with international law. And in the margin of this summit and in the aftermath of the liberation of Kherson, we could see as well that the lines are shifting. I also had an opportunity to meet the president of China, and that gave us, who, just like we did, very much expressed himself against any nuclear escalation. And I believe in the coming month, China can very much play a greater role, a role of mediation to prevent the resumption, an even greater resumption of land offensives after the winter. And I had a chance to discuss this matter with President Xi Jinping, and I agreed to visit Beijing in early 2023 so that we can intensify our discussions on this very specific point. In addition, I met with Prime Minister Modi, and we agreed on a very clear line: greater cooperation, and here again we want to re-engage cooperation with cooperate in order to engage Russia. On Monday evening, ahead of the official beginning of the G20, we also gathered together Senegal, President Macky Sall also being the current president of the African Union, Rwanda, South Africa, Argentina and Mexico, here again to very much build convergences and to send across a very clear message to Russia on behalf of all countries, an unequivocal call to end this war. And as you noted, this G20 has been useful, enable us to acknowledge some major convergence, and will continue for peace in the coming weeks and months. Second purpose of this G20, according to me, it was to deal with the food issue. And as I said in March, in the margins of the NATO summit, in the short and medium term, this war is aiming at destabilizing our food supply chains, given what Ukraine represents in terms of grain and fertilizers. And this war is destabilizing the entire world. Regarding grain, even though the markets expected a major crisis due to the blockade of the Black Sea, the European Union enabled us, through what we call the solidarity corridors, to export some 15 million tons of grain from Ukraine. That is 60% of the total exports since the month of April. Then came the deal negotiated by the United Nations this summer, and as of today, some 9 million tons were exported through the Black Sea thanks to this deal. As a result, the food prices have dropped, and we've been able to export, to make sure that grain could be exported on a regular basis. Russia was threatening to jeopardize this mechanism. Nonetheless, the G20 sent a very clear message to President Putin to prevent another hike in grain prices. Some major work was undertaken by the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I would like to thank him for that. The Black Sea grain deal must absolutely be renewed by the end of this week, and that will be the case if the deal is not expressly denied. So it means that the various routes that we opened will continue to be used to export cereals out of Ukraine, as is the case today. Regarding the fertilizers, we also achieved some progress since the strategic meeting that I conveyed in New York in September. On the occasion of the Paris Peace Forum last week in Paris, we acknowledged, together with the World Food Programme, the opening of a new corridor to transport Russian fertilizers from Europe to Africa. And the first shipments will be delivered next week. France will contribute financially, and we just allocated some 7.5 million euros to that effect. This is in accordance to what I announced in September. Russia just said it would add some new taxes to fertilizers exports. But here again, the G20 is sending across a very clear message. It would be irresponsible to add new obstacles to food trade or agricultural trade. And in this respect, each and everyone shall be bearing their responsibilities, and we will increase the transparency of the markets thanks to the G20 AMIS mechanism that was launched back in 2011 at a G20 under French presidency. And here again, this mechanism enables us to monitor all of the transactions and to lift any hurdle in relation to agricultural flows and in particular fertilizers. Last night we also held a meeting with the World Bank, the IMF and a number of African countries to continue to work in the long run on the circulation of fertilizers and to work on increasing the production capability in Africa as well. And all of that is very much in line with the farm strategy that we launched as early as March 2022. So this is about the second part of this G20, food security, with here again some clear messages, clear conclusions, and making a number of mechanisms sustainable, and very concretely so. The third major message of this G20 is the message of solidarity towards the South. Indeed, this had to be a G20 summit of solidarity. And both the Indonesian and then the Indian presidencies of the G20 very much want the G20 to deliver on its promises. The poorest countries shall certainly not pay a high price for a war they did not wish. And the Perum summit already last year enabled us to make a number of decisions, and we can see that some major progress was achieved and that the G20 is able to deliver. On the 18th of May, France had launched in Paris an initiative to support the poorest countries. And we took the initiative of reallocating special drawing rights from the most wealthy countries to those who are most in need. The goal is to have $100 billion reallocated towards Africa and other countries in need. So this goal that was announced in Paris on the 18th of May, was endorsed by the G20 last year in Rome. And today we have $81.6 billion of SDRs already reallocated. This is a very concrete result. It bears witness to our ability to mobilize the international community and made it possible for Rwanda, Barbados and other countries to have access to financing in very favorable circumstances with the IMF, with a 10-year grace period, for example, interesting rates. So it is a way to support the most fragile countries financially. And we launched an appeal for everyone to meet their commitments. If we want to bridge the gap between 81 to $100 billion, we need those who are lagging behind to deliver on their promises. We also wish to improve the technical mechanism, and we are to that effect working with the IMF, and please allow me to commend the work undertaken by the IMF as well for being so inventive. And in the context of the situation we're going through, and given that the situation is only worsening for developing countries and into middle-income countries, France, together with a number of other countries, committed to reallocating 30% of our SDRs, or to provide some equivalent support. The G20 also committed to working on the debt of the most fragile countries. And regarding the G20 work on finance, we intended to work on refinancing, and we already have a historical agreement between the Paris Club and China and others in order to restructure the debt of Rwanda, and we're hoping to do even more. That being said, like I said in Sharm el-Sheikh, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the fact that climate change is speeding up, all of that is leading us to set up some sort of to scale up when it comes to financing southern countries, because we need to make sure that these countries can meet their vital emergencies. In this respect, given the discussions that we had at this G20, I announced that in June we will hold a conference in Paris dedicated to a new financial pact with the South. The purpose of this conference will be to take stock on the special drawing rights with the 30% goal that I mentioned. We will also look at any way to improve solidarity for the South, to work on the reform of the international financial institutions, and there will be some major steps in the spring. And then when we meet in Japan on the occasion of the G7, we can draw all the conclusions regarding this new financial pact and massively involve the private sector for the energy, agricultural and industrial revolution. We will also work in order to ease access to financing. In the context of this new financial pact, we will also have to include the issue of climate vulnerability. And this is for us to deal with the issue of losses and damages, which is very much on the agenda at the COP27. We can certainly not ignore what happened in Pakistan over the past few months, what a number of middle-income countries can go through. These are massive events arising out of climate change. And today, nothing in the international rules, financing rules, is including these situations. So we very much would like climate emergency to be a new factor, something that enables to trigger international financing. To that effect, in the margin of the COP27, we launched an initiative to deal with the technical elements of that. We're doing it with Barbados. And on these 3 points, at least, we'll be working with the African Union, Barbados, which is very much dealing with losses and damages, India, as the presidency of the G20 next year, the United States, that will be playing a major role, and all of that, of course, in close coordination with Japan, that will be presiding over the G7. Lastly, notwithstanding the war, and that is my fourth point, because it was important on the agenda of this G20. Lastly, we very much wanted to continue and stick to a commitment when it comes to climate change and biodiversity. We cannot sacrifice our commitments due to the war led by Russia. So we had to confirm and to clarify our goals. We had to confirm because the G20 is still committed to the Paris Agreement goals, including the target of 1.5 Celsius degrees, which means that we need to update our NDCs. And we also added something in the G20 community this time, given that there is a clear commitment, an unprecedented commitment for the G20 to phase out coal. And like I said a few days ago at the COP27, this is a key priority if we want to be able to meet our goals. Next point that was clarified, a deal was signed in Sharm el-Sheikh with South Africa, and then Indonesia, here in the margin of the G20, also signed an agreement and we will be supporting it. We, France, will be supporting it financially. And this was a result of Glasgow, when we decided to support a number of countries to phase out coal. So it was done with South Africa, Indonesia, here, and we'll continue the work. I could keep the floor and tell you that health was already at the heart of our discussions at this G20, here again in a spirit of coherence. As we recover from the pandemic, we've been working on preventive measures, how to prepare for health crisis, and a fund, the FIF fund, created, and we will contribute in the amount of $50 million. There was also an initiative taken by France in the spring of 2021 in order to transfer mRNA vaccines to Africa. President Ramaphosa to that event, and all the necessary financing was gathered to that effect. So there is very much a strategy to prevent health crises and to deal with them together, and that's been confirmed at this G20, including on the financial elements. And we'll continue to work on international taxation and the work on the first pillar, which is very important. And as you know, this is something France has been working on for a number of years. So in the end, notwithstanding the tensions, notwithstanding the risks, multilateralism and peace continue to prevail within the G20. Russia did not intend to isolate itself against the majority of the G20 on that point. And our Sherpas worked together ahead of the summit. And now it belongs to Russia to listen to the messages sent across by the international community and come back to the negotiation table. This G20 also shows that our world is being reorganized, and that the war is questioning many of our rules and the governance of our international institutions. This is the reason why we are very much working on the reform of the international financial institutions in the coming months. And this is the reason why France is fully supporting the African Union application to join the G20. If we want southern countries to be properly represented, we shall open up the club to them. This is what I meant to say to you. And of course, please allow me once again to thank the Indonesian presidency and President Jokowi for all they did, and for enabling us not only to express a message of unity, but also for all the concrete progress achieved, which are only making us more efficient. I'm now available to answer your questions. The first question from RTL, French Radio. Mr. President, sir, regarding the missile that hit the Polish territory, we heard that it was necessary to be prudent. We also hear that the Americans are suspecting maybe a Ukrainian missile. We hear what Russia is saying as well. But at the same time, President Zelensky is telling the G20 that this is a Russian missile. Do you know any more about it? Can you tell us more? First of all, President Zelensky did not send any information to me, even though we talked to him, but I know a number of things. Yesterday was a terrible day for Ukraine and their people. More than 85 missiles hit the Ukrainian territory, in particular on civil infrastructure. So yes, it is a very clear message, and as often when Russia suffers some military setback, there's an increase in the attacks against the Ukrainian territory. And it is in this context that 2 missiles hit the Polish territory and made 2 casualties. And once again, please allow me to express our condolences to the Polish people. As we speak, the circumstances do not allow us to say who is responsible. So please allow me to draw a distinction between what Ukraine has been suffering yesterday and what happened on the Polish territory. Indeed, the United States undertook some first investigations, preliminary investigation, and we are in contact with the American and the British services and our Polish friends in order to fully understand what happened, and then we can communicate when the time comes and in the proper circumstances. But as a matter of fact, more than 85 missiles that hit Ukraine, its people, its territory. There were also 2 missiles on the Polish territory, and we need to find out what happened. But as we stand, it is simply to express the solidarity with the Polish people as well, and it very much shows the risks of that situation. A question from AFP. Mr. President, you just referred to all of these massive strikes against Ukraine. Did you see that as a provocation on behalf of Russia, address sent to the main leaders, the leaders of the G20 who were meeting here? And do you still intend to call President Putin, and to that what effect? Well, I'm looking at the facts, and I'm not sure this is a provocation towards the G20 leaders. And no matter what is terrible in itself is the damage suffered, the suffering of the Ukrainian population. And we can very much see that since the counteroffensive led by Ukrainian Donbass has been successful, we can see the reaction of Russia. So like I said, for a number of weeks now, we see that civil infrastructures and populations are being targeted. But the fact that this happened during the G20 does not change anything when it comes to the seriousness of what happened. And it shall not either alter our willingness to build peace and gather everyone around the table. So once again, I would like to say that anytime France can be useful, we will continue to work to that end. Like I said, I spoke to President Zelensky, and we will continue to speak to Russia when necessary. And I see that there are more and more joining us in this respect. We need to do everything that we can to help Ukraine resist. And this is the reason why in a few days we will hold a conference in Paris to help Ukraine go through the winter and to rebuild their infrastructures. So we will help Ukraine resist and defend itself militarily and bear this war from a humanitarian point of view. At the same time, we always said that there would be a negotiated outcome to this war. And this is the reason why France continues and will continue to speak to Russia.
Guardian, Russia and the Chinese presidents have both said they have.
Votre micro plus près que j'entende mieux.
Sorry, the Chinese and Russian presidents have both said they have a partnership without limits. In your discussions with the Chinese president, did you urge him to set some limits in relation to Ukraine that go beyond him indicating he's not in favor of a nuclear escalation? And did you have any success in that endeavor? And related to that, do you think if China did say something more, it would have an effect on Russia?
Je pense qu'il y a 2 éléments clés pour la Chine.
I believe there are 2 key elements for China, which by themselves set a limit. The first element is that if you look at our P5 statements in January. That is a statement by the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, including China. There was a strict condemnation of any nuclear attack. So this limit was set from from an early point by China. Second, President Xi has always been very clear on that one. China is calling for peace. Lastly, if I look at the statements made by the Chinese president, there is a genuine attachment. And I know he is sincere. I know China is dearly attached to the Charter of the United Nations. And in it, there is compliance with territorial integrity and sovereignty. So for all of these reasons, I'm well aware that sometimes Russia is referring to nuclear with some sort of an ambiguity, and it is Russia that violated the territorial integrity of Ukraine. But we have these robust limits to our partnership with China and what Russia is doing. Mr. President reaffirmed to solidarity with the southern countries, food security, and the renewal of the Black Sea grain deal. Can you tell us more about this new initiative taken regarding fertilizers? Did you talk about energy? It is a heavy burden for southern countries. Next, you also met Paul Kagame on a number of occasions, and the situation is worsening in the east of Congo. What can France do for de-escalation? Regarding the first point on fertilizers, we have almost the same approach for fertilizers and for grain. What is urgent is that we make sure that gas and other components are made available so that fertilizers can be produced. We worked on that with the World Food Programme, with corridors, and we will keep doing it. Most fertilizers needed in Africa for their agricultural model. And I'm not blaming out for that because they're using less than we are in Europe. We have a strategy to phase out these fertilizers, and we cannot ask Africa to do more than we do. So Africa needs gas, they need components, potash, ammonia, other components. So the first answer, what we are doing with the World Food Programme, a number of countries, the Netherlands, Estonia, we're getting fertilizers out of Russia to a number of countries, including Malawi, for example. The second thing is that we are working to increase the production capacity for alternative fertilizers. So we are mobilizing financing to that effect so that in the short term, Africa can produce more and reduce their dependency towards Russia. And the third element is that we're willing to help Africa to produce more, including sustainable fertilizers on their continent, not using natural gas, and they're different models. So this is very much comparable to what we did with vaccines. It is about setting up hubs in Africa and help them consolidate their own production. You have capabilities in Morocco, Senegal, Nigeria. So yesterday we decided, together with the African Union, the IMF and the World Bank, to map the needs in the short and middle term and to map our financing capacities so that we can put in the necessary money together with the IMF and the World Bank. So fertilizers are not just about the issue of energy, but you mentioned energy. And in this respect, most African countries are deeply affected by the cost of energy. This is impacting their production model. This is impacting their budgets because they have to protect their populations against this shock. This is the reason why we need to scale up when it comes to financing Africa. They're using their state budgets to resist the crisis. Somehow they're doing the same as what we're doing, but they are much more fragile financially. And this is very much in relation to the initiative I referred to earlier. As to the situation in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the tensions with Rwanda, like you said, in the margin of the UN General Assembly, I gathered both presidents, Kagame and Tshisekedi, and I also thank those who contributed to sorting out the problem. And there is the Nairobi process that we support. So what we're trying to do together with the United Nations and under their auspices is to try and contribute and a number of others. The aim is to enable a withdrawal of the M23 and to restart a political process that should be the priority in dealing with these tensions. And I know I can rely on the commitment of Presidents Kagame and Tshisekedi in these circumstances, and I very much would like to thank President Ruto for his support, and France will continue to work on that. Two more questions, including Iran, because I promised. Mr. President, sir, like you said from the very beginning, France was in favor of a negotiated outcome to the conflict in Ukraine, and France was criticized for that because a number of countries considered it was not the right thing to do, to talk to Putin. Now, after all of these meetings in the margin of the G20, do you feel you're making progress on this stance, and that the possibility of a negotiated outcome is being supported by more countries? I have the feeling that this is the only outcome that can be supported by the entire international community. It is the only possibility. And I'm very pleased that a number of countries sent across some very clear messages to that end. They are nonetheless, of course, supporting Ukraine, but also saying that at some point in time we will have to reopen the negotiations. But the path to negotiation is fully compatible with resisting, and this is what has to be combined. Ukraine has to resist. They're being extremely brave with the international support, in particular that of the United States and Europe. We commend their courage. They probably would have been defeated without all of this support. They're fighting for their own right, but also for its. So this is the priority, resistance of Ukraine. But at some point in time, we also need to work in favor of the negotiations, and I think we probably achieved some progress, and there's probably a greater consensus in this. It is a willingness to speak to everyone, to make a clear choice, and to say that even though the war is raging and even though we're not parties to the conflict, we should prepare for peace. We have the United States of America, the United Kingdom, Germany. We're all talking about it, but also mentioned it and talked about it with Prime Minister Modi, President Erdogan, and others, and President Xi Jinping. And President Erdogan is playing a very useful role in this respect. One very last question on Iran.
Time is Alireza Mohebi from Iran International TV. Recently met a delegation of prominent exiled Iranian women and human rights activists and praised women's revolution in Iran, which was really warm welcome by the Iranian people. Can we say that we are watching a change in the policy of the French government in relation to the current situation in Iran and the Islamic Republic? Thank you.
Je vois un changement certain dans la situation.
I see a genuine change in the situation on the ground. And first of all, I can see the growing aggressivity of Iran. Aggressivity against us by unacceptable hostage takings, regional aggressivity as well, due to the very aggressive actions taken, including bombardment of the territory of Iraq recently. And I'm very much calling upon Iran to come back to calm and the spirit of cooperation. France always respected the leaders as well as the people of Iran. We always had an approach, a respectful approach. But I believe that the choices made recently over the past few months by Iran are not the right ones. And therefore, I'm calling upon Iran for calm, respect for regional stability and for French citizens as well. Next, there is something else that has changed. That is this revolution of women, young people of Iran defending our values. When I say our values, not French values, but they are universal values. They are in our charter, that of the United Nations. Equality, gender equality, equality between all humans, and here again, fully respecting Iran's sovereignty. I think it was important nonetheless to commend the courage and the legitimacy of this fight. This is what I meant to say to you today, but I'm afraid I have to go because we're on our way to the APEC summit in Bangkok. Thank you very much.